Huh. Well, who knew? Turns out wives have a BS meter too. Hello, everyone. Terrence here with Hollywood Already Did It. If you haven't already, go ahead, like, share, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, ring that bell below. Anytime we have something, you will be among the first to know. We've arrived at episode 7 of Poker Face called The Future of the Sport, dealing with a little bit of villainy that happens on the race car track. Stars Tim Blake Nelson and Charles Melton as two rival race car drivers who get in. There's some devious actions versus one another. What is intriguing about this episode is the first time it sort of adds layers on top of layers, a twist on top of twist on top of twist, until you really don't know where this one's coming from. I love that. Yes, there's a formula to these episodes. We still start first 15 to 20 minutes as sans Charlie, but each time it sort of does a different way of getting into the meat and potatoes of the story. So this episode opens with Keith Owens, played by Tim Blake, and Davis McDowell, played by Charles, as these one. Keith Owens obviously is the older seasoned racer, and Charles Melton is the young up and coming one. And he's sort of in the shadow of him. Owens' name casts this big shadow. There's this big history and legacy that exists with him, grandfather, on and on and on. So he gets all the sponsors, even though it appears sort of that Davis is the better racer. All attention goes to him. So they have this race. It gets pretty contentious. McDowell knocks Keith off the road, but ends up winning. And so when they do the interview Keith Owens, not McDowell. And Owens is supposed to have retired. This is supposed to be his final time, supposed to ride off into the sunset. And he uses this point to say, nope, I'm sticking around. And a big brouhaha happens between McDowell and Owens, and punches are thrown. What we kind of learn is that Owens has sort of made a promise to his family, specifically his daughter, that, hey, I'm bowing out. At the end of the season, this is my last race, and then I'm going to hand the keys over to you, and then you subsequently would be the new heir of the Owens and go ahead and drive away your hearts out. But he is choosing not to do that because he's like, Owens don't go out on a loss. That's his way that he's justifying it. He's saying, hey, I don't want to set you up where you take over the legacy with the losing father. But he's still trying to hold on. That's what it's all about. Because what we learn is that Kat, his daughter, is essentially it's a much better racer than him, and better than McDowell as well. Then out of the blue, what we think is out of the blue, Davis comes to Owens' home and sort of antagonizes him. Starts getting on FaceTime and getting all up in their face. He pulls the bird feeder out and kind of just drives over their flower and kind of just messes them up to the point where the wife's like, all right, go get him. I know I told you say we're going to retire, but nah, get his ass. And so what he does is he makes a call to them because the McDowells are also the town tow people. So he calls them, says, hey, I need a tow. Tow truck comes out. That's also the tow truck garage is also where they house Davis's car. So as he pulls out, Owen sneaks in and sabotages the car. He goes and sabotages so that he won't be able to race properly the next day. Now, what's interesting is that every time that Owens gets into a car, I'm going to say Keith Owens because Katie's also an Owens. Anytime Keith Owens gets into a car, his hand shakes. This hand with the ring finger. His hand shakes all the time. And it's sort of the flow of how he gets into the race isn't there because he has this sort of nagging feeling on the back of his neck, which has always been Davis. The next morning after he sabotages the car, that shake don't happen. Why? Because in his brain, he knows he's no longer a threat. I no longer have to worry about Davis. So the race happens, what we believe to be a race happens, and all of a sudden we see Davis's car crash, smoke coming out and on fire. And Keith Owens steps out of the car, kind of smiling, but feigning concern, like, oh my God, is he okay? And then we go to black. Enter Charlie. Charlie being her lovable self again. This time she's working at a go-kart range. What I have to accept about this show, and I have to wrap my brain around it, is that whatever we got in that first episode, and I think the third or fourth episode where Benjamin Bratt comes back, we're not getting that. This show is perfectly fine, and I'm okay with it now. Perfectly fine being that show that just kind of goes week to week. Not cops, but cops. kind of figuring out a scene. And then I think probably in the finale or episode right before the finale, we'll bring back Ron Perlman and Benjamin Bratt to close up the loop that happened at the first. It just got picked up for a second season. So we know that the story is going to continue and these stories are going to keep going. They're going to have to stretch that out a bit. Anyway, Charlie here is working at the McDowell Mario, the go-kart range. Jean, who is Davis's mom, works there as well. And Charlie sort of feels about racing how I do. I'm gonna get some crap from this from my folks who watch racing. But it's a bunch of left turns, which she sort of equates it to. And Charlie is taught by Davis a little bit on this video game machine, kind of how intense the racing can be. And in that, she learns sort of a bit about how it is not as simple as just being a bunch of left turns. He also makes a move on her, which she politely tones down and spits away. But it's the first time, interesting, that I think she's ever been hit on in any of these sequences, which is kind of cool that the young upstart is trying to make his move. He's like, yeah, it's felt like the moment. I appreciate the try, but nah, this ain't it. But in this, Kat then shows up. Kat, who is Keith's daughter, shows up and kind of confronts Davis and says, hey, look, race me. And Davis knows that she's better, just like Keith knows that she's better. So they get on the go-kart race and they battle it out. And Davis gets just owned 3 times in a row. Kat's like, it's like the Pinju from Lion King. Pinju again. And she's just the better of them. That is the sequence when then, out of spite, out of anger from the Owens legacy as a whole, he goes to the home of Owens and uses the bird feeder and whatnot as a sort of get back on them. Is at that point that Jean sees the phone, sees their son being an ass, and kind of is like, hey, look, the demon should be in you. You should have that. I want you to have that dog. I want you to have that fight. All of our men in our bloodline have had it. But what they do is they keep it on the racetrack. You and I can be on the racetrack. Stop antagonizing, stop guiding them, put it on the racetrack. But he still feels a certain amount of way. He started drinking at night. He's drinking, having to just wallowing in his sorrows about getting owned by Kat. Which all is important. I at first I wasn't quite seeing why Kat was getting such an important piece of being in the mental of Davis, as well as the mental of Keith to a certain extent. But now it makes sense when it all comes together. But then we see the other side of when Keith makes that phone call and John picks it up. She's like, okay, somebody needs a tow. But she's not going to let her son do it because he's drunk. And needs to kind of just cool out a bit. So she takes the truck out. Then we see the sequence where Keith rolls under, starts sabotaging the car. Unfortunately, what we didn't see before is that Davis completely saw everything. He was home, popcorn burned, he had to go outside, and then thus he was looking dead at Keith as he was tinkering with the car. And he put a fish hook in the hood. I don't know all of this. This is what they said in the show. Don't think that me saying this makes me understand what cars are, because I still have no clue. You put a fish hook in the hood that when the carburetor expanded, it would catch and thus not allow you to slow down. Davis sees that and then starts continuously sabotage the car by sort of tweaking the seatbelt, so that the seatbelt would be in a situation where it was not up to code or up to standards. He then shows up the next day at the race, and in a practice run, he kind of goes over to Kat. He knows that Kat feels like she's better of them and she should be racing. The only reason she's not racing is because of her father. He starts playing with that a little bit. He's like, look, you know what? I know you're better than me. Take the car around and see if you can do a faster speed than what I did. I did a 2-3. I think he said, let's see if you can do that. And she's like, all right, yeah, I'm down. One of the first time where the sort of opening sequence of what appears to be clear and straight, it's subverted a little bit. So we see the crash, but then we pick up the scene where Keith comes in and is like smiling, like, hey, is he okay? And they're like, no, hold on. You don't understand. Kat's in that car. Davis is fine over in the corner. He sees Davis and then he just starts freaking out. Because he's responsible for his daughter's death. Luckily, Kat does not pass. She's just in a coma. And so Charlie got to go to work. But Charlie doesn't really think too much of it. She's like racing, this sort of stuff happens in racing. I think she thinks, she's like, I don't really know that much, but like, this seems to be par for the course. This is where Davis tries to be slick, because earlier in the episode, he learned of Charlie's sort of ability. There's a kid who was like, I have cancer, trying to get into a picture with Davis. And she's like, I call bullshit. And he's like, wait, why did you tell a kid who has cancer? That could have gone terribly wrong. It's like, no, I can kind of smell out or suss out the truth. So he knows about her ability, becomes sort of the cancer dog, if you will. But in that, he starts using her to like, hey, look, somebody sabotaged my car. Am I lying? And he's sort of using her ability against her, telling her the truth, but manipulating it in a way that works to his benefit. He's like, yo, a tow came in last night, but it was a false alarm. I feel like Keith probably went in, and that false alarm came in and tried to sabotage things that were so easy that you kind of have to, are outside of the realm of possibility, but make sense in the way that he's telling it because he's telling the truth. Charlie's picking up on it and saying, oh, well, yeah, that does make sense, that truth. Yeah, all right, cool. And they're ready to go beat up Keith. Charlie's like, no, let me go talk to him, suss it out, see if the lie is happening. So she goes to the house and kind of confronts Keith and saying, hey, you're a fisherman. She's the fishing hooks on the wall. It's like, there's a fishing thing that showed up in the carburetor, which is just the damnedest thing. Like, I don't know how this all works, but would you happen to have anything? She sort of leaves it out there on the table for him. And he says, I didn't touch that kid's car. Charlie clearly sees he's lying. Luckily, in that moment, his wife shows up. Keith's wife shows up, and Charlie leaves. And she can see Keith's wife at that moment also gets her BS meter, something that I think most husbands understand that wives have against them. But he's like, oh, no, it's nothing. And she's like bullshit. The same way that Charlie always says bullshit. And so subsequently, he has to sort of confess. He goes on national television and confesses all about what he did, pretty much at the same time that Charlie Davis and his crew member were about to kind of go let the cat out the bag. He sort of takes the rug from underneath him. And so all looks to be good. We're fine here. Nothing else to do. Charlie seems to be running off into the sunset. I'm like, all right, well, it is what it is. He committed, he confessed to it. So there we are. Karma is like a consequence. So what then happens is another one of those kids at the go-kart range come up to Davis, and as Charlie's about to leave and kind of like go to work, she overhears her saying the kid is a little freaked out about racing, specifically about seatbelts failing. It's like, hey, I don't want to race if seatbelts fail and all of that stuff. And he goes on, he's like, seatbelts are safe. What are you talking about? He's like, well, Kat's seatbelt wasn't. He's like, look, what happened with Kat was a freak accident. Charlie's BS meter goes off. And then she has to do some more digging because she is not quite sure that everything that is being done or everything that's been said is on the up and up. So then Charlie asks her Davis's crew member, what do seatbelts get checked in the same way or inspected in the same way that engines do? He's like, no, they don't, which is something that Davis would know. Like if I jack up the seatbelt and I cause any more damage or make anybody fall or be not safe in this moment, they're not going to check the seatbelt. They're going to check everything else. They're going to check the engine and all that stuff, but the chassis, the actual seatbelt area, they don't. Wear and tear, normal, just old parts play a part in that. But then Charlie sees Gene, and Gene's kind of lowering in her shower, saying, "This man was in my home, came to sabotage my car." And at that point, she's like, "Well, I went out on the tow, not Davis." And at that point, Charlie starts putting more together, like, "Well, maybe he was home and saw that Keith was putting a sabotage and putting the monkey, if you will, in his car." So she goes to the garage to kind of get a lay of the land. And in that, she sort of gets pinned and found out. And they have a confrontation. And he's been threatened. He had a pipe, but the truth eventually comes out. Now, what's important about the scene, and I caught it immediately, is that anytime that Davis is raced, he raced with a photo of he and his grandfather in there. When he came to the go-kart range earlier, and the kids surrounded him. He talked about that photo. That photo was not in the car, which leads Charlie's brain to kind of going down the path of like, hey, you weren't ever planning to be in that car if you were outside of the car. If this was outside of the car. Like you don't go anywhere without this. So clearly you already had in your brain that you were going to be driving this vehicle. She gets out of that garage, but then sort of gets a scare chase with the tow truck coming down the street. And she luckily evades it. And the truck can't turn quick enough versus her turn. And video game lesson came in handy. And then the next scene is of Davis with a Lucas Oil shirt on. He's got the sponsors now. He's gotten everything that he wanted. He's got the win. But Charlie comes up to the car before he's about to take off for the race. Kind of explains some things to him. I went to the hospital where Katie was with Keith's wife, and we had a conversation. And Keith's wife straight up was like, no, he's got his flow back. He told me about the flow of a driver and what that means and how you can and can't have it. And I get it. I'm starting to get it now. He's like, just leave. What are you talking about? Get out of here. He's like, yeah, I'm going to leave. But also, Kat is lucid now. And that girl loves racing. Like she talks about it. She sleeps about it. Everything about it is in her DNA, is in her blood. And she's coming for you. She's coming for you. Might be a month, might be a year, might be a couple years. But she is coming for you. That's all I wanted. I'm going to take off. And she leaves. And at that point, full circle moment. Never seeing it before, Davis now hand is shaking because the flow is not the same. He knows now that he has this young upstart coming in the back end that is better than him. That is going to come at some point in time. Might not be today, might not be tomorrow. But when she hits that track, he's going to be in the same boat that Keith was at the very beginning of this. It all comes full circle. Beautiful and fun little episode. It's subverting the idea. There's no murder in this, which is probably for the best because I think some people, me a little bit, I'm being tongue in cheek, but a little bit of like she's becoming the angel of death. Everywhere she goes, death happens. But this time, death doesn't occur. Coma happens, but it's sort of the comeuppance. Karma sort of gets the best of everybody, and a little bit of hubris, a little bit of knowing when to let go, when family comes first. All those sort of play a piece in this episode, in this pot of gumbo, to make a pretty wild episode. I wish we could have got more of Tim Blake. I like him a lot as an actor, and he seems to be a little bit more on the sideline of this. This is really Charles's episode, but still a really solid episode. I do hope, and I kind of got to give it up. Maybe we'll get the tying piece back to the beginning again, but we have now stopped getting to the point of her driving to these sequences or finding these jobs. It's just she's already in job by the point that the episode begins. So once you get that rhythm and once you understand that, then it becomes a little bit better to kind of just sit back, enjoy, and kind of just bite into these delicious episodes that we keep getting from week to week. It's a really good episode, and we'll deal more with, instead of solving murder, it's more about karma and how karma sort of, as the young man says in this episode, karma is the consequence. Better words have never been said. What did you guys think about this episode of Poker Face called The Future of the Sport? But leave your thoughts and comments in the comments below. If you haven't already, you can follow us on Twitter at HollywoodADI. You can hit us up on email at HollywoodAlreadyDidIt@gmail.com. We also have a podcast by the same name. That's on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that plays podcasts. We're there. And like always, I got my ticket. You got yours.